This is the Eminent Planet Podcast bonus fish episode. Yeah, that's right. We're following up our episode 19 with a little bonus. And we're going to be talking with Claire Rearick, the motivation for the last episode of the Eminent Planet Podcast. Motivation for my conversation with Tom Andrews. Again, if you have not listened to that episode, go back and take a listen to it, especially in these days of worldwide pandemic. He's got some words of wisdom, I think, that are applicable, even though we recorded it way before all this craziness happened in the world. He's got a lot of wisdom, and some of the ways, some of the perspectives that he's applying the fish principle to education, I think, has some application towards how we just live our lives today. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to episode 19. And then yesterday, I had a chance to talk to Claire Rearick about her perspective and her listening to the episode and thinking about how does that advice apply to her current position. She's a third grade teacher. Again, I'm a teacher of teachers, and we just had a conversation about how do we take this fish philosophy and apply it to today. And we're not offering advice. We're really just offering what we've learned. And if you've learned some of the same things, that's great as well. But just wanted to put this out there as an opportunity to follow up my conversation with a 50-year educator, with someone who's been teaching for 3 years. Something I wanted to do all along, but we had a chance to do it, and during some pretty interesting times. So here's my conversation with Claire Rearick. Claire, thank you for taking the time during your self-quarantine time to come and talk on the podcast. Appreciate it. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Enjoying the time off for now until online learning begins.
Yeah, so why don't you tell, so we're recording this on a Tuesday. It's St. Patrick's Day. I believe context is necessary because it seems like things change fairly quickly right around now. So again, we're dealing with the coronavirus and the implications it has for schools. And so I'm at home. My context is I'm at home with my kids and my wife. We both work in education settings. So yeah, I work at the university. She works at a preschool. And we have all our kids home for until at least the 30th. And then how about you, Claire? What's your situation?
I'm also at home. I am a third grade teacher at Della Davidson, and so we are currently out of school until the 27th. That could change, could not change. It's still a very day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And so I kind of was talking about you a lot in our last podcast episode, but do you want to give a little bit more background on yourself besides third grade teacher?
Sure. I'm originally from the Chicagoland area and went to Ole Miss for my undergrad and then stuck around for an extra year to complete my master's and was blessed to be Dr. Amadon's graduate assistant.
Wow.
And then right after that, I was offered a job here in Oxford at Della Davidson. And so this is my third year. So I'm almost completed my third year of teaching at Della.
All right. And so it's that third year is always that, I always think it's that year when everything kind of makes sense. And then, all of a sudden a global pandemic happens.
Yes. And I mean, I personally have never experienced anything to this level. Even when I was in school or anything, we only ever missed school for snow days. And so this is definitely a different scenario that I don't think anybody has ever really dealt with before.
Yeah. So to back up and to think, well, why are we doing this podcast episode? One, I think it's good to have things trying to go into some sort of normalcy, even though this is so far away from being normal. Also, too, the last podcast episode was from Claire. It was generated by Claire's idea to talk about the book Fish, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But in recording the episode with Tom Andrews, who is, again, my first boss, and had an experience where he went and actually worked at the fish market, world famous fish market at Pike Place in Seattle, and thought, okay, we're going to talk about that. But then my plan all along, even whenever you came up with the idea to talk about the book, Claire, was to talk to you afterwards, because here's someone who's has 50 years of education. Like you said, you're in your third year of teaching. I thought it'd be nice to see what lessons could be learned, and just to contrast and see what things might he have said that maybe just where he just put out there, but it's like, whoa, that's a big nugget of wisdom. So that was the plan all along. And then given, from when we recorded that episode to now, how the world has just changed, I thought, well, why don't we talk to Claire and see there's some lessons learned here. So, but let's back up, Claire. Why did you recommend the book Fish?
So I originally read Fish, I believe it was in grad school with Dr. Foster. She had us read this book, and we did a lot of group work with it, I remember. And back then, I remember it having a pretty big impact on how I thought of education. And then recently, I kind of, once I started listening to your podcast, and I was like, oh, I'm just trying to remember books that I've read that, might be helpful for you for future podcasts. And I was like, I remember this book being really, impactful. And so I kind of pulled it back off my shelf and looked through all the notes that I had written in it during grad school. And a lot of it, I was like, I kind of forgot these ideas that were big for me in grad school. And so I'm hoping, are helping me teach in my third year a little bit better than I have been in previous years. But it's always nice to kind of go back and find those words of wisdom to help me grow.
Yeah, I'm someone that likes to write in my books, and so it has been good in some of these podcasts, especially like 2 episodes ago when I got to talk to Gloria Ladson-Billings. I mean, that book I read, I read in undergrad, and then I read it again in grad school, and just the underlines and stuff that impact me, or that I learned something while in each of those phases, and now as a teacher of teachers, it's like, okay, now it has another level of learning for me. So yeah, it's good. It's good to revisit.
Because when you read a book the first time, you could read it a few years later and get something completely different from it as well, just based off experiences with life. And so it's kind of always neat. That's why I always like to buy my books, which I know is not the best economically, but I always find it helpful to always have that back on your shelf, that if you go back to it, you could always learn something new from it.
Well, yeah, and then like this one's been around for a while. There's lots of copies out there, so if you're looking for one, you can get it nice in a used bookstore somewhere. So all right, so now we're gonna get into it, and basically what we're country is very meta. We're gonna talk about the learnings from the podcast, which was about learnings about the book Fish with Tom. But again, I think there's some things that he mentioned within the podcast that just kind of rang true, especially for now. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to episode 19, go back and listen to it, and then this will make a lot more sense to you. It's 55 minutes, but I think it's an hour well spent, especially if you're sitting around and thinking like, I wish I could do something. And it's a good listen. He's got lots of stories, lots of examples, but we're going to talk about some of those things right now. One thing, Claire, I think this is pretty clear, is that we're going to start with a disclaimer. And usually I offer a disclaimer about the book, and hey, if you find value in the book, go get the book. And we do want you to go get the book. But the things that we're talking about in dealing with this situation that we're currently in, dealing with this global pandemic, where there's people in situations that are so serious and so dire that for us to speak to them is not, I don't think, not appropriate, right? Like, we're really not offering advice. I mean, if there's so much advice on social media right now and out there from folks about everything that they're doing, especially with their kids, with teaching, with learning, like, we're going to offer some things that we've learned. And if you learn some of those same things, hey, that's great. But we're not saying, hey, here's the things you should do, because everyone's situation is different. I think actually one example from the podcast with Tom, he talked about a student who was doing a forensics competition and talking about giving a monologue about the danger of a single story. And I think we're offering our own stories. Like, I've got my story, Claire's got her story, and how we're dealing with this situation. And, it may or may not apply to you. You might have a completely different experience. And knowing that, yeah, I'm dealing with a job where I can do things remotely and some people aren't. And so anyway, just want to put it out there that we're just trying to put some content out there that I think is helpful, but everyone's situation is different. Okay. So we've already talked about how you came to fish, and Dr. Foster has made a lot of connections to the Eminent Planet podcast with some of the recommendations she had for the Broken Record podcast, which is a great listen if you're looking to something like that. But then also, hey, this book generated from her too. That's two big ones. All right. So Claire, we're going to start with a high five. So what are some things that you learned from the episode and maybe thinking about how it might apply to our current circumstances here?
So one big thing that I took away was when he mentioned, and this was big in fish as well, was just to have fun and work hard. I think right now having fun might not really be on our fresh in our mind, because we're all kind of stressed. We don't know. We've never been in this situation before. We don't know what it's going to look like tomorrow. We could end up getting sick. We could not end up getting sick. People we know might end up getting sick. The schools, who knows what's going to happen with really kind of normal way of life. But I think it's important that we stay, kind of true to ourselves, and that it's okay to have fun, even during kind of a tough time. And going with education as well, I think a lot of times, in myself as well, being in a big testing grade is kind of stressful. And you want to make sure that you're providing everything you can for your students and getting them prepared for this end of the year state test. But it's important to have fun. And it's important that this aspect of play is not just important in a student's life, but also in the teacher and in the adult. And that I know a lot of adults right now are in a situation that they never thought they would be in, that they are having to maybe be the teacher to their child when they've never really done that before. And that it's okay for you to sit back and have fun with your child and not do something, strictly academic, building with Legos or finding a creative situation. I think that's important to remember during this time, because we're all kind of a little bit stressed outside of things. We're unsure of where things are going. And so the aspect of play was something that I found really important. And I think it's overlooked a lot, especially in adult life. We forget sometimes to have fun and to enjoy that moment with our kids or with our students, especially as well.
Yeah.
So that was a big play.
No, that's good. I mean, Tom had lots of examples of even in, just his interim positions and jumping into classrooms and having some fun with the students and with teachers, and even when he went to the fish market and jumping in there and having fun with the people there. But I think too, there's something about play where you're present. Like if you're actually in play, you're present in that situation. So like we just got done after lunch, we play a game. And so we played a game of Quicks, which is an awesome dice game. Actually good third grade dice game. So we just got done playing that, and just it's a moment during the middle of the day. We've done some academic stuff in the morning, and we had some lunch, and now we're just, hey, let's play a game. And now let's get into our afternoon, some creative time. And so that's good, and something about that, like we need that, and we can't just keep refreshing Twitter or something like that. We're just going to get lost in that world, and to jump out of that and be present with whoever you're with, or even if it's by yourself. I saw in the trending apps in Apple was solitaire. Even some good solitaire might be good.
Yeah, and also, going on that as well is it promotes a lot of positivity to have that play and to be present in that play, even if that. It's not just playing a game. It could just be taking a moment of your day and doing some self-reflection or reading a book, kind of that self-care aspect of, just because, especially with teaching is a hard job, and you get burnt out a lot. And I think we get so focused on that to-do list, and even in regular life, we get focused on that to-do list, and, and I personally, I have a list for everything. And my goal is to get everything crossed off on that list. And I feel like sometimes I focus on that too much. And I'm like, oh, I didn't get everything on my list done today. Like I failed.
Failure. Yeah.
And instead you got to focus on, okay, well, maybe what did you accomplish? Or if you sit back and you make a priority list of these are the 2 things that I really want to get done today. And if I get these 2 things done, then I can reward myself. And I think back to college, and this is pretty terrible sometimes, but some of the readings we had to do for college were a little tough. And so to motivate myself, if I read a page, I would eat a piece of chocolate.
There you go.
Like motivation aspect to do, to complete my reading. Just because you have so many distractions, especially with your phone, that a lot of times it would take me way longer to complete a chapter of reading than it needed to. And so kind of if you apply something as simple to that, of if you work hard, well, reward yourself, and don't just keep going, trying to complete this whole to-do list until you're completely burnt out. You have to take those breaks. You have to take those moments to have fun, even in your job. Take a walk. It doesn't have to be, going to the park or something. It can be something really simple of just playing a game on your phone for a second, or, having a conversation with a friend. Right now, FaceTime is really big, FaceTime and family member, something like that, where you don't even have to leave your house or your job, but you're just taking a moment to reward yourself for what you have done and what you have accomplished.
Yeah. Or calling up your former student and seeing if they want to join you on a podcast.
There you go.
Yeah. So I guess one that plays right off of that I had was when he talked about dealing with trauma. And so he had an example in the podcast about when he was at Weston, which had a school shooting. Administrator lost his life defending his students, and he stepped into that position, and Tom is a very gifted person with being a teacher, but a counselor, a coach. I mean, he just, and then coming from, and I didn't even know this, from his own circumstances where he didn't have a dad growing up and his mom left when he was in 7th grade. Like, it's pretty intense stuff. And so having that skill set, being able to go into that situation, but then idea about how do we deal with trauma in that situation, and thinking about, like, in that case, he had to be present within his students. And then, even thinking, like, to acknowledge, like, loud noises are going to be pretty traumatic. Like if a book drops on the floor, and you think, like, now, I mean, we were on a Skype call or a Zoom call earlier, and someone on this Zoom call sneezed, and you're like, oh, it's like if you're in a public situation now and you hear a sneeze, I mean, it's kind of, some alarms go off, and I can't imagine, like, with kid, and that's for an adult, and they're like, what's up with kids, and thinking about, wash your hands, like, which, yes, they need to wash their hands, but, like, how are we dealing with the trauma again? And this even goes back to what you were saying. How are we playing? How are we doing things? And so, just reflecting on myself about how am I being present with my kids, if I can't be physically with somebody, how can we be present with, like, some of our family through FaceTime, like you said, or Zoom calls or Skype or whatever it is. And, and then thinking, like, this is not what I'm taking away from this time too, is I've got students out there who are dealing with this as well. So it's not just thinking about trauma for kids, trauma for adults, trauma for my college age students, trauma for parents, dealing with job situations, and thinking about, and even some of those parents could be my students, right? Like, they could have kids in schools and things, and they're dealing with all sorts of circumstances. And, when I'm thinking about moving my class online, which is what we're doing right now at the University of Mississippi, how am I making sure that I'm not just doing this one-to-one thing where every task they were going to complete in, face-to-face and in person without a global pandemic going on? Am I making sure that I am taking only the essential things that are necessary to get the kind of the main idea of the course across? We don't need to overload people with work. We don't, this is not creating this huge to-do list that we're not going to cross everything off, because that's not going to help with this trauma situation.
Exactly. And building off of that too, is you have to think about, I know several, even my 3rd graders who, they're the oldest sibling and they have to look out after their younger siblings. And in a situation where childcare is up in the air, and you have to think about, especially high school teachers, where those high school siblings are probably the childcare if their parents do go to their jobs. They're the ones that have to take care of these younger siblings, and teachers need to be very aware of, you don't know what's going on in these homes when we have these online situations and these online classes, and we have to be very flexible and understanding of that. And, they might not, or they might have one device that they have to share with all four siblings, or they have internet, or, they're trying to get internet, or they're doing it on a phone that has limited data. There's a lot of different situations that we're not aware of. And that we do need to be very aware, not aware because we can't really be aware of it, but we do need to be understanding and flexible and
sensitive. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, this is going to be a tough time to kind of work out, and it's going to be weird even next year, coming from this towards the end of the year, or going back to classes if we're able to. It's going to be a weird adjustment period that, it will just have to be very present and kind of like what he was saying when he was going back to the school after that terrible instance, is you have to focus on what's important, and being present and being aware is going to help you hopefully better help your students.
Yeah, exactly. Any other learnings that you had?
Yes, my really big one that I said, wow, out loud when I think
That's
he was
good.
talking to his son, and I think he was a doctor, and
Mark. Yeah.
Yes. He said that his son was saying that it takes 10 to 20 seconds of courage to make the right decision, to make the good decision. And that one really, I took a lot away from that, because I think about everything we were kind of trained for in the School of Ed was this thing called wait time, and to give kids the opportunity to think and to prepare their response. But it's also important when you're dealing with misbehavior, and giving that 10 to 20 seconds of you to process maybe what's happening in your classroom, what was just said, or what's happening, and trying to find the best way to respond instead of just responding right away, maybe out of frustration, maybe out of, irritation, because that normally doesn't ever lead to a good relationship. But if you can take that 10 to 20 seconds to process what's happening and focus on the student and maybe why they're reacting in that way. And it's hard to do. It really is, especially if, you're in a situation where maybe there's danger. It's hard to take that time, or it's hard to, there's a lot of emotions sometimes. And, but I think it's important to try your hardest. And that's something we can all work on. And even in this instance in the world, if someone sneezes, take that 10 seconds to process that they're human, and, want to be treating people like they're not human, and to show that compassion. I think right now is kind of a selfish time. A lot of people are, that we're all scared, and we're acting, we could be acting in ways of fear, and we're trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to protect our families. But that can kind of sometimes come off as being selfish, and trying to remember that compassion and taking that 10 to 20 seconds of, do I really need this toilet paper, or is there someone else that might need it more than I do?
Yeah.
Or I have a gallon of milk at home. Why don't I leave this for someone that might not? I think right now we're all just really unsure of what the future holds, and stores are closing every day. You're like, you're not sure. We've never been in a situation like this, but that one was kind of a big impact for me, of taking 10 to 20 seconds of courage to make that good decision, to make that right decision of, let me think about what I should be doing in this situation, rather than just reacting to emotions, which can be applied to both an education standpoint as well as just a real life standpoint as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a good story that he shared about his son. And like, I need to make a correction. I don't think I've ever met Mark. I met his other son, but I've never met Mark. And just hearing about his desire to become a doctor, and then that choice, and then following it, and following that passion, following that desire, into an unknown, right? And that's where we're at right now. And like, how do we not let the unknown scare us, right? And that's It's a good lesson. I had one that I think is, trying to get in the positive side of everything is to jump in and learn from opportunities. It just seems like Tom is got that, like, he's been in education for 50 years but he's still like, you missed it because I cut off the recording, or I started the recording later. But like when he first got on, I was just laughing because he looks exactly the same. Like he looks like the same, like youthful. He's got this smile on his face, and if you from Chicago might recognize the Wisconsin accent, like that, just love it, and just his desire to jump into these situations. And so, I couldn't believe that I called the fish market and they said, yeah, come work a shift, and he's like, okay, and he flew out there and did it. And then to hear about, like, when I heard he was going to go coach at Cleveland State after he retired, I'm like, what? Like it just is like one of those, like, let's just jump into it and let's just see what happens. And now with these interim positions where he's just, jumping in at 6 months, a year at a time administratively, but then not just, I'm going to steer the ship, I'm going to stay at the helm, and that's it. Somebody else is going to go build. But no, he's building a relationship. He knows about the forensics competitions. Like, I don't know if I've, I was a student in school. I didn't know anyone that was in forensics, or even, like, it's just like the way that he, with enthusiasm, jumps in these situations. And so thinking about our current situation, how can we jump into it, right? And how can we learn as much as possible? Again, and I'm taking this from my perspective, this is not advice, it's just what I've learned, is like, how can I take this situation and think about how can I learn as much as possible from it? So, like, for example, technology. I'm really having to think, like, I'm thinking more about technology now that it's all online, and thinking about how can I make sure that what I do to put my class online can be as accessible as possible. Like Claire, you can remember this, when I used to have like 7 different platforms in my class that I would use, Blackboard, Google Class, or like whatever, all these different things. And it's like, well, that could be really hard if I'm on a phone trying to jump back and forth. Well, how can I streamline and simplify it so that somebody with a phone, with a smartphone, can access the materials and not be lost, right? So, like, making them as accessible as possible. Or even thinking, like, have some chunks of time at home now. What am I going to do? So Claire's actually looking at my new, and I'm quoting in quotes, office, which is basically a closet in my garage that I painted, given our kind of time off here, to make look somewhat decent. But anyway, like, using that time to, like, okay, let's figure out a good space to work and do stuff at home, and trying to take advantage of that time and jumping into the opportunity, like, let's do something. And then also, too, having, like, extended periods of time when you're not having to commute or other things, like, what can you do? You can play some games at home. You can, try to learn an instrument. You could do some other things that involve, or go on Duolingo. I'm going to work on my Spanish, whatever, jump into those opportunities and just see how can we take advantage of a situation. It stinks, but, like, there's a good side. There's something we can get, or something I can get out of this.
Mm-hmm. And right now, too, as I'm seeing a lot of these platforms for education that are offering their services for free during this time, and, like, utilizing those opportunities too to maybe try something new at home, or try something that I've been interested in for classroom reasons, and now, well, it's free, maybe I'll go on and try it out and see what it's about, and not trying to see new opportunities rather than just focus on how am I going to get what works in the classroom onto an online setting, when in reality it's kind of impossible because there's just no way to make that connection. And so you kind of have to focus on, well, this is a completely new, different experience. How can I make it the most beneficial for all students and most accessible for all students as well? Building off of that, I liked how he kind of talked about a genuine response. I feel like that kind of goes in with what you were saying too, about, when we're on these devices or doing what we need to do at home, kind of being there and having that genuine response of trying your best and making sure that you're connecting with someone. Because I think, especially on online, it's hard to connect. especially with our students, and you might not have a video conference where you're actually seeing them, but you want them to still feel that genuine response that you give them in the classroom. And so that's what's something that I will be struggling with, is how do I offer that genuine response? How do I offer that relationship that we've built in our classroom? How am I going to show that on an online platform? Like we have greetings in our classroom. We do morning meeting in our classroom. How can I try to create that in an online sense? So that'll be a challenge that I hopefully will accomplish, but that's something that I'm thinking more of rather than the standards I have to teach. Make sure that our relationships are still building, that we're still having that genuine time together in a situation where it's not together. So that's something that I'm kind of interested to see play out, hoping it will work out in a way.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, like, how am I going to use video in a way so that if people can connect during, asynchronously or at the same time, like we can have question and answers for the classes that I'm teaching, or also too that can be recorded so that they can have it for later. Thinking about it's just at least to see faces, because a lot of times if you're just sitting at home and you're interacting with TVs and stuff like that, but at least you can have interaction with an instructor who is investing in you. Again, trying to go weed through the logistics, and again, there's lots of advice out there for how to do that as well. Any other learnings that you had, Claire?
Well, I know he mentioned the method of grading and how he was not a fan of how it doesn't reflect, a child's learning process. And that kind of goes with what we're doing. It's in our school this year is standards-based grading, which is a really student-focused grading system, which if a child doesn't master the skill by the time that the unit test comes around, it doesn't mean that they don't get it at all. That just means that we're going to keep working on it, and we'll give them an opportunity later on to reassess, and hopefully they will master it at that point. But it's kind of a mentality of you've got all year. You've got all year to show your mastery, to show your skills, to show your brain power. And I think that kind of goes along with the fish philosophy a lot of, being there, being present, having that positive attitude, making those choices of what's best for your students. And so that was something that I enjoyed, and that, just kind of the power of the choice. And, you hear that a lot, of that growth mentality, that growth mindset of, making your attitude the best that you can. And it's hard in teaching, especially is, teaching is a hard job, and you get down on yourself, and you get belittled by parents or other teachers or, administration or whatnot. And a lot of days you feel like you're failing your students, or you're not good enough to teach, or that in some way, it's hard. But we have to focus on why we went into teaching. And if you ask most teachers, which I'm not all teachers in the world, but most teachers do not go into teaching with the mindset of, I'm going to teach these standards. It's all about these standards. They go into teaching because a previous teacher, or they go into teaching because they love children, or they love to instill positivity and strengthen children, or they want to, help improve the education system or something. And if you focus on that reason, on that why of why you went into teaching, that kind of affects your attitude. And on those tough days of maybe you do have a lot on your to-do list, making that choice of, I'm not going to get bombarded by this to-do list. I have report cards due. I have tier meetings. I have IEP meetings. I have whatnot. But making sure that your attitude is always focused on that why of those, those little people in your room that depend on you. And that if I go home and I spent good quality, genuine time with my students, and they know that I love them, and that they know that I support them, and we smiled and we had fun, that's way more important than anything on that to-do list. And so that was kind of something, and that kind of gathers all of those fish philosophies into one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to tie that into, that's perfect segue, into what he said too about the fish philosophy. It's like, it's not like Tom has, is like the fish philosophy, card carrying member, but he said like, it's a part of it. He has taken the fish philosophy and seen things of it and basically inserted into his own philosophy that's also been shaped by his faith, by other books. You mentioned like 4 other books that he's written. He's like constantly. It sounds like he's constantly refining his philosophy and to taking it and making it your own, and to think about your purpose, and then like identifying things like what's in the fish philosophy to help you like action your purpose, right? To see like, what does it look like to love my kids? It might be to be present, right? To think about how we can incorporate play into what we do. It's not all serious business, That was, oops, I hit my microphone. That's not so, it's not like we're saying to anyone that adopt this philosophy or it's the best thing ever. It's like, no, there's something to be learned and gleaned from it, and so that we can move forward and be better, right, as we go forward and try to be better teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right, so next, now what is something you would have done differently if you would have heard Tom before now?
I've almost completed my 3rd year of teaching, and they always say if you survive the first 3 years, most of the time you'll stick it out. But those, they're tough first 3 years, that's for sure. And especially the first year. And then I had your child in there and, added a little pressure to my first year teaching. But I think looking back, and when I focus on what I want to do better, it's always that aspect of being there and having that genuine response. That being there mentality. And I can get so focused on that to-do list, and it affects my attitude in the classroom. It affects the relationships with my students. And it's hard to have that be their mentality. It's not something that, I'm just going to wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be there today. It takes work, and it takes, reminders throughout the day of, oh my goodness, I just got 5 emails this morning at 6:30 in the morning that I have to respond to. It takes a while, it takes a lot of effort to build up that mentality. And so that's something that I don't say that I regret anything in my last few years of teaching, but that's something that when I focus on maybe things that didn't like about my teaching, most of them were wrapped around not being there, not building those relationships with my students. And that's something that this year I really focused on was trying to be there as much as possible and trying to build those relationships. So that's something that I would have done differently.
I think for me, I'm just going to point to this situation and like, I think after hearing Tom and I definitely approached this situation differently. And the fact that, like, again, trying to take advantage of the situations, thinking about having extended time at home and what does that mean? How do we, not just get sucked up into social media and the phone and whatever, or just even the busyness of it all, and trying to, hey, I've got a lot of time with my kids at home. Thinking like, how can I make that as positive an experience as possible? And also to care for them as well, be present. So.
Yeah. And you're blessed with the opportunity where you have that time with your kids. I think a lot of people still do have to go to work and They don't have time. And so if you are blessed in that situation, use that, really utilize that time. And then hopefully then they'll look back at this crazy time in the world and maybe they'll have some positive memories from it rather than just fear and the, certain future.
All right. So how about going forward, Claire? What would you think? With something maybe you will do differently? Or is that anything different than what you said before?
So being there is definitely something that I want to focus on. But it's also, I think, the play aspect too, of taking care of myself. And it's okay to not do everything. It's okay to not, work hard 24 hours a day. It's okay to take that time to enjoy your life and to enjoy the people in your life and to enjoy the students and your family. And I think that applies to today's situation as well, is, take that break, take that time to have fun and build those memories that hopefully will override any of the bad memories that could occur in this situation. Hit the pause button every now and then.
Yeah. And I think for me, I mean, I've been trying to think about this own situation where, man, I'm a warrior, like at heart. I'm like a professional, and but trying to think like what might the lessons be learned from this situation. So it's even thinking like relationships, valuing human connection, like, or even like the value of slowing down. Like, you have to slow down in this situation, and like we can't go doing every 1,000 things, and like my commute is 0 right now, and again, blessed to have that situation where I can work from home. But thinking like, what does slowing down look like? And then like thinking it's kind of nice not having to go in 1,000 different places at night. And so what might that mean going forward, and how might we incorporate some of that in our life? Like, maybe we're learning some things here about what life can be like. And so that being present thing, I guess, is what really is coming out there.
And it's important when life does eventually go back to normal, taking this time of what we did learn from it, what we might have enjoyed during this time, and trying to make sure that we fit that back into the normalcy of life when it comes back around.
Yeah.
And making we have that time of maybe not building up our schedule so it's so crazy, and maybe being like, okay, what's something I can take off of the schedule so that we can have this time that we had during this situation.
Or even going the other way, Claire, is thinking like, right now I'm like, my calendar is almost like clear, right? What am I putting in? Like, being very it's like, when you completely clear out the junk drawer, and like, what actually needs to go in this drawer, right? And only putting the things in there that need to be in there, right?
Well, utilizing this time to do something that you normally wouldn't do in your normal day-to-day life. Like, maybe you've been putting off clearing out your closets for a while, like I have. Maybe I will tackle that tomorrow, and that can be my to-do list instead of your normal to-do list.
All right. So the final thing, Claire, how would you sum this up for a 7-year-old? And I used to say this is because I have a 7-year-old, but he's no longer 7, he's 8, but that's okay. Some for 7 sounds better than some for 8.
Just trying to think of it that you could estimate for an 8-year-old.
Yeah, estimate for an
8. I would say, to sum it up for a 7-year-old, that when you are with someone, enjoy that time and make them smile and have fun and build good memories.
I like it. I'm gonna stick with that one. That sounds good. Well, Claire, thank you so much for being willing to come on in these unique circumstances. And again, like we said, we're just trying to offer something up, given what we learned from the previous episode, and just hoping it offers some value to some people, and knowing that others might be in completely different situations. And just, hoping everybody's out there and staying safe, right?
Mm-hmm. Wash your hands.
Yep, wash your hands. All right, thank you, Claire. Yeah, so there's my conversation with Claire. And like I said before, I've wanted to do this episode ever since I thought of maybe talking with Tom, someone who's been in education for 50 years and counting, and then wanting to talk to Claire, who's been, finishing up her 3rd year, as she said in the episode. But, now on top of it all, with the interesting times that we're going through with this global pandemic, there was something to be shared. And so one thing I want to do as someone who's putting out these podcast episodes is to keep doing that. And right now we've been going at a pace of every 2 weeks. I think I'm going to try and go every week if possible. So I'll put it out there that next week we're going to be doing something in the Create line. We had a lot of good response to the episode where we did with about the Broken Record podcast, that's the Rick Rubin, Malcolm Gladwell podcast. We're going to do something sort of along that lines of looking at something from the music world. If you've looked at my Instagram feed, you kind of see I put out these Amazon Planet songs of the day and just kind of a record album and a song that I've been kind of listening to. It might be from a record I just bought or something I heard on my Spotify Discover Weekly one to put out there. I really love music. And so we're going to keep extracting some of those lessons, think about how they apply to teaching, and then, even think about creativity in these times and thinking about how do we use technology as a tool and some of those sorts of themes that can pop up. So anyway, expect that coming out next week. I'll put it out there. We're going to do one next week. So that's about it for this bonus episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. If you want to support, you can do all the things that you normally do. You can like, rate, subscribe, do all those sorts of things, download, share, especially if there's people out there that that you can hear that would need to hear some of the lessons. Especially, again, I really love that episode with Tom and think about some of the wisdom out there. If there's any new teachers out there, I think there's a lot of wisdom there that could be shared. And then even for people that are not teaching, you just got some good stories. And other ways to support, you can subscribe to the email list. You can find that at AmazonPlanet.com or through the Facebook page. You can like the Amazon Planet Facebook page. You can also seek to support through buying a shirt. I'm wearing my Be the Good shirt today, which if you don't know anything about the Be the Good shirts, there it says, believe there's good in the world, but highlighted within that it says Be the Good. And I think that's a good message for both ourselves and for those around us. Like, if you're doing that social distancing, that's being the good right now, right? So if you want to support the podcast through purchasing a shirt, you need that little boost. We could use the support, but then maybe you could use the message and sharing that Be the Good sort of message to people around you, even from a good social distance. So you can find the links to the Amazon Planet store in my Instagram bio. There's a link there, but there's also links at AmazonPlanet.com. Well, that is all. And I just want to thank everyone out there. Thank Matt Mifflin for the music. Thanks, Claire, for joining me for this bonus episode. And also, thanks to you out there who are being the good out there in these strange times, using the gifts you've been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do.